the idea that you shouldn't be discouraged because you're the only one, right? Sometimes we have to be the only one for something. We just passed the date, the remembrance of Imam Husayn's martyrdom. Well, he was the only one. Oh, not literally the only one, but you understand where I'm going. He was the only one who stood up against the injustice of his time. But what was the errand that everyone appreciates that he did that for Islam, and everyone in their own way, whether Shia, Sunni, Sufi, etc., or even non-Muslims in some societies, commemorates that action and appreciates it. So it's very important to think about whether or not what you're doing is truthful, rather than how many people are doing it with you, because society doesn't remember people to say, oh, he was alone or with a million people when he stood for truth. They'll just remember you for that stand.
You mentioned Imam Husayn, and
Mm.
yesterday was Ashura. What I find interesting about Ashura is that it is said that that's the day that Adam and Eve descended to earth, and that Moses freed his people from the tyranny of Egypt, and then, of course, the martyrdom of Imam Hussein at Karbala. And what I find fascinating about these events is they happen thousands of years in between each other, and we're thousands of years away from them. But
Mm.
it kind of stands to show that human beings are always struggling with their own problems, whatever it might
MashaAllah,
be.
yeah.
And it's so fascinating to me. Like everybody's got their own thing, but we're dealing with it. And that's just
Yeah,
the story of humanity.
that's one of the things actually about Imam Hussein and the story of Ashura that makes it so relevant. There's a famous quote by Ali Shariati, which is that I think it was said originally in Persian, but it's more known in Arabic, where he says, every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala. Kul yawmin Ashura wa kul ardhin Karbala, or something like that. And this idea is that this Karbala thing is universal. We shouldn't just pigeonhole it into the actual event, but the idea and the lesson behind it is true, because in every time, in every place, on a small level to a large level, there's injustice going on, and there's someone who should stand up against that injustice. And every one of these events that have happened on Ashura, whether the banishment of Adam and Eve or the freeing of the people of previous prophets, etc., or the rejoicing of one group or another, each one has a lesson, like all the stories that we have inherited from our tradition, that we could benefit from. And definitely, of course, as a person from Iran, or just generally from like a kind of a Sufi Muslim orientation, the Karbala story is very important. So people a lot of times associate just with Shias. Of course, Karbala is for all Muslims. Imam Hussein, he's a righteous Sahabi, an Imam of the Muslims, a grandson of the Prophet, etc., peace be upon him. There's no questioning his fada'il, his virtues. But the Sufis and the Shias, especially, this like event is very important to them. And there's just so much commemoration you can see in countries like Turkey and India and Pakistan, whatever. There's either Shias or Sufis, or sometimes they're together. You can see so much going on around this event. And another beautiful wisdom that that I actually posted on the page recently was, and I'd like to read the Persian for you guys. So hopefully maybe some
For
of you are
sure.
either motivated to learn Persian, or if you know Persian, you can enjoy it. Where this poet, his name is Qasim Anvar. I believe that he was a Naqshbandi. He said, سخت محرومی و بس بی بهره‌ای چون مسلط شد یزیدت بر حسین. So he says, you'll be deprived of blessings if your base Yazid defeats Hussein. So this idea is that, of course, Ashura is in every place, in every land, because in every day there's some injustice happening. It's also inside every one of us, because inside of every one of us, there's a tug of war between a Yazid and a Hussein, a nafs that desires the Yazidi things, the evil and injustice and hurting others, and etc., going for yourself, and that soul that's Husseini in its base, of fighting for justice, of standing up for what's right, of being a shahada lillah and nas, like it says in the Quran, of being a witness of Allah upon the people. So there's a Karbala happening every day inside of us. And there's a famous saying among the Sufis, I don't know who said it first. He was saying that instead of making a show to curse Yazid, because of course Yazid, and maybe some non-Muslims are watching, or people just generally not familiar, Yazid ibn Muawiyah was the guy who, he didn't directly kill Yazid or Hussein. I mean, he didn't physically battle. He was in Damascus, but he created the series of events that led to this event. Every one of us has this Yazid inside of us. Every one of us has this tendency. So instead of cursing him, which is, it's extra because he's already cursed for what he did, we should curse the Yazid that lives inside of us, that produces a Karbala against other people, where we steal other people's rights, we oppress
Yeah, I
other
like
people,
that
we hurt other
actually.
people, etc., etc.
That is very profound. I really like that. Yeah.
It was a
And
Turkish
this,
Sufi, by the way. I
is
saw it
that
in
right?
subtitles. I was watching his Ashura khutbah. It was a Naqshbandi sheikh. and
Oh,
he
that's
said it
fascinating.
in Turkish, and I was reading subtitles. Yeah, so inshallah, I could send you the original. You can enjoy the original
Yeah,
Turkish.
no, for sure. And I have to commend you for posting that because I promise you that day that you posted that, I felt so lazy, man. I was just not feeling into living as my higher self. But I saw that
Hmm.
in those words and the Farsi, it just kept going through my head, and I'm like,
I'm so glad.
you
That
got to
means a
be
lot.
better, you just got to be better.
Absolutely.
Going back to like this story, what I find fascinating is, Imam Hussein, he had this willingness because of his integrity to do what no one else was willing to do. Because anybody else, anyone sane would have just found another way, right? Given in. But
Yeah.
he didn't do that. And because of that, we remember his name. But at that same time, there must have been a bread maker in Kufa, and he was afraid, right, to stand up for what's
Hmm.
right. He thought, I'm a bread maker. I'll be quiet. I'll live my safe life, very stable. And hey, who knows? Maybe he lived a very long life, but he's obscure. Nobody remembers him.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
this concept of just like doing what others aren't willing to do, to stand by your own integrity, I find it very cool because, I mean, in a way, it
Absolutely. Absolutely.
immortalizes you. Yeah.
Right, right. And this is why injustice persists because everyone thinks in their own paradigm. They don't think of a greater scheme. They think, okay, well, I'm going to die. I'm going to XYZ. I'm going to get, exiled or imprisoned. But no, but everyone collectively thinking that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy produces the end result, right?
Yeah.
So when Imam Hussein went to, or not went to, wanted to go, there were Sahaba who were more senior to him. And unfortunately, I can't recall their names, who came and visited and tried to talk him out of it. They said, look, your brother made a peace agreement with Yazid's father. Well, you can do the same thing with Yazid, And I don't know if this was floated around at that time, but maybe they understood that this was a possibility. He was presented with a chance to live and govern in Ray, which is where his wife, Shah Banu, I think the third or something is from. So he actually Imam Hussein had one Persian wife. I don't know if that was his only wife, but he had a Persian wife, and she was from there. So they said, okay, you can go and live where your wife is from, or you could live a quiet life in some way, shape, or form. And maybe it would have been kind of in a worldly way, the rational thing to do, right? Okay, why go get yourself killed? Why produce this calamity, etc. And maybe because everyone collectively thought that way, injustice was able to prevail over the Muslims, who just like in many Muslim countries today have this lesser of two evils approach. They say, okay, well, we'll work with the unjust government because it's better to have an unjust government than to have chaos. Maybe there was people in Yazid's court who wished that he was, deposed or something like that. But sometimes only one person is willing to stand up. And even if you lose in the dunya, you're a winner in the akhirah and in the dunya, because even in the
Yeah.
dunya today, how is Imam Hussein remembered other than as someone who stood up for justice, right? So even many Muslims, they in the West, they bring this up because in the West we try to create common ground. I didn't realize this until I lived in a Western country as an adult who was aware of practice Islam and all these things. How many Western figures had commented on Imam Hussein, like from the classical era until modernity, into people like Gandhi and things like that, had quotes talking about Imam Hussein in Islam. So, I mean, he not only is just for Muslims, but he really is, and especially now with diaspora Muslims, he's becoming kind of an international symbol
Yeah.
of standing for what's right. So it's always better. I mean, of course, if we can personally do it, it's easy to talk about, but it's always better
Yeah.
to be in that position.
Yeah, no, it's a very admirable story. It's very cool. And it's interesting how that theme, that element of standing up when no one else does, like you see that even in mythologies, right? Sigurd and the dragon Fafnir, Heracles and the Nemean lion. Even in the Persian tradition, Rustum, he goes to chase Divas to
Mm-hmm.
feed the white demon, the biggest, baddest demon in the land. Everybody's afraid, but he goes after it. So those are the heroes that you remember, the people that face up to the challenge. I think it's a very cool perennial truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And
Yeah,
then,
definitely. This
yeah,
is one of these human universals.